Shio, hello. My name is Levita Hill and I am a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I have served my tribe and community for over 20 years in various positions related to budgets and finance. Grants management has been a critical element of my work, and I am happy to share my grants management experience with you. This video is part of a series of educational videos by Raven Rock Strategy Group, LLC, around grants management for tribes and tribal organizations. In this video, we will share practical tips and resources for managing grant awards, including understanding your grant budget and ways to track grant expenses in compliance with your grant award. We will demonstrate how to keep a CUF account or subledger of your grant expenses and how to incorporate this data into your grant accounting software. Lastly, we will talk about how to translate your financial data into the required SF 425 reports for federal grant awards. In video 1, my colleague Corey introduced you to a grant budget. The grant budget will be identified in your notice of award. In your application for the grant, you would have been required to develop a proposed budget. It's possible the funder accepted this budget as you presented it. It is also possible that the funder amended your budget, only providing a portion of the funding that you asked for in your application or only approving certain types of expenses. Because your notice of award is essentially your binding contract, it is important you reference the notice of award when building your grant budget, as these are the line items and uses of grant funds that were approved. These approved line items and expenses are often referred to as allowable costs. Anything outside of these approved line items are unallowable costs, and you cannot use grant funds to cover them even if they are an essential part of the overall project. Funders will often be explicit about unallowable costs, but if there is ever a question about whether the cost is allowable, it is best practice to reach out to your grant officer or program specialist. You will want to build a chart of accounts around the approved budget for your grant award. This may require some crosswalking between your accounting software and your grant budget. There may be a scenario where multiple line items in your accounting system will flow into a single line item for your grant reporting and compliance. It is important to document how your accounting system chart of accounts flows into your grant reporting. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, we can see that our funder has approved a budget that includes salaries and wages at $100,550, fringe benefits at $27,099, supplies at $3,350, travel costs at $9,402, and contracts at $86,872, bringing our total direct cost to $227,273. The grant also allows for indirect costs of $22,727 for a total grant award of $250,000. We will talk more about direct and indirect costs later in this video. Let's focus on the supplies line item for this example. Let's say the funder allows various types of supplies under this grant award: medical supplies, office supplies, and personal care supplies that go directly to clients. The funder is going to allow you to report all supplies costs under a single line item in your grant reporting, but your tribal organization accounts for medical supplies, office supplies, and supplies for clients under 3 separate line items in your accounting software. That means in order to produce an accurate grant report for each period, we will need to pull data from 3 line items to complete our report on purchases for supplies. Some accounting software will allow you to manage subledgers within the software itself to track expenses. If subledgers are not an option in your organization's software, you might also consider tracking financial information outside of the software using a CUF account. Let's do our first check for understanding question. The costs a grant will cover are called blank costs. A, direct, B, indirect, C, unallowable, or D, allowable. The answer is D, allowable costs. The costs a grant will cover are called allowable costs. Next, we are going to talk about utilizing a CUF account to track grant expenses. A CUF account is essentially a subledger that is kept outside of your accounting software. If your accounting software will allow you to manage subledgers within the software, we highly recommend you utilize the software to its fullest potential. However, we recognize that not all software will allow for this level of input. A CUF account can be a valuable tool between departments managing grant activities and your finance office for tracking, reconciliations, and reporting. Utilizing a CUF account to enter financial information before sending it to your finance department for processing can be a valuable tool. We prefer utilizing a spreadsheet program like Microsoft Excel for building a CUF account. In essence, we are going to build our approved grant budget, crosswalk to our organization's chart of accounts, and create space to track individual transactions to be entered under each line item. As transactions are processed or submitted for processing, they can be recorded on the appropriate section of the CUF account. In this example, let's say that we have two transactions to process. The first transaction is for office supplies and the second is for personal care items. In our CUF account, we will record the transaction date, vendor, transaction description, our internal purchase order number, and the transaction amount. As we have additional transactions, we will record those transactions in the appropriate section. This CUF account will allow us to track transactions line by line over the life of the grant. It is best practice when keeping a CUF account to enter transactions into the CUF account document prior to submitting the transaction through processing and financing. This document will allow you to better track what is submitted for processing and will give you a document to reconcile against before preparing grant reports. Let's do another check for understanding question. A CUF account is a good replacement for accounting software. True or false? The best answer here is false. We recommend using a CUF account in addition to accounting software if your software lacks the capability of managing subledgers for grant awards. CUF accounts will not replace the need for reliable accounting software. In this final segment, we are going to talk about translating your financial data into an SF-425 grant report. The standard form 425 is the federal government's standard financial reporting tool for federal grants. One important thing to remember about this form is that the data is cumulative over the life of the award. We are going to focus on Section 10 of SF-425, which is broken down into 4 parts. Federal cash, which is the amount you have drawn down or receipts and paid out on allowable expenses or disbursements. Receipts less disbursements equals cash on hand. There are limitations on the amount of federal cash on hand your organization can hold, so be sure to pay close attention to those requirements. Federal expenditures and unobligated balance. Here you will record the total amount of federal funds authorized. In 10E, you will record the total amount of allowable expenditures as of the end of the reporting period. This is where your CUF account data and financial transactions will be reported in total. You will also have the option to report unliquidated obligations or expenses that have been incurred but not yet paid. Use the form calculations to calculate the total federal share and unobligated balance of federal funds. Recipient share. If your grant award requires a tribal match, You will use this section to record the financial transaction data related to your match. You will enter your total match requirement and the amount of your match expenditures to date. If you do not have a match requirement, you can skip this section. Program income. You will use this section if the activities funded by the grant generates program income. Your notice of award will spell out how you should treat and report program income. If your grant activities do not generate program income, you can skip this section. If you are not familiar with the reporting requirements or something is not clear in your notice of award, we highly recommend you contact your grant specialist or program officer for more information or seek out technical assistance available from each agency. Let's talk for a moment about direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are those costs paid for by a grant funding which are directly related to the grant-funded project. Direct costs typically include labor costs, fringe benefits costs for direct labor, materials, supplies, and other items purchased to complete the grant-funded project. Indirect costs are paid for by the grant for supporting costs associated with your organization, such as general administrative expenses like finance, information technology, and facility maintenance expenses that support the departments doing the grant-funded work. Indirect costs are calculated using an improved indirect cost rate. Now we will take a look at our last check for understanding question. Financial data reported in the SF-425 is cumulative, true or false? The answer is true. Financial data reported in the SF-425 is cumulative over the life of the award through the reporting period. Thanks for listening in, and be sure to take a look at the other videos that are part of this series for additional information. And feel free to visit us at www.ravenrockstrategy.com for more resources.